Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And this is part two of the Merlin interview. Part one we've just done. This just is an immediate follow on. So this is just the header that goes in. And so we're going to just cut straight in. But again, one more tiny little warning that because it's a Zoom call, the video quality and the sound quality are slightly reduced. But it is entirely watchable. So it's more what I was going to say what Merlin, but we all know that Merlin now is Leslie Roberts. It's what Leslie has to say that's far more important than the manner in which it appears on the screen. And there are a few interesting little snippets in this one, in particular about the Shipman sisters, but that comes towards the end. But do watch and enjoy, and I hope that between the two videos that this will be enough for you to hit that subscribe button, because there are going to be plenty more videos to come. Anyway, here goes. Let's continue this first interview. Here goes. Do the edit.
One of the gentlemen who was involved in fitting the pipes has spoken to me, and I believe he may speak to you at a later stage.
Oh, certainly. I'll speak to him. Yeah, yeah. Because that's half the problem. We got a bad hospital and it's falling apart. I know. Now we've said it went into special measures, but you told me something when we spoke last about somehow coming out of special measures, which I think certainly needs to be discussed fully.
I actually didn't know that it had come out of special measures until I was told, or until I heard it within a meeting, and it was a meeting that was online, and I thought they have taken that out of special measures, and yet it didn't seem to be in the mainstream media.
They
Whether it
didn't.
was,
They didn't
or
tell anyone.
they didn't seem to. I'm
No.
not saying they didn't, but I have got someone, I know someone very well who's involved in the inquiry within the QE. And what that person said to me was on the 13th of June, she got an email, and it was decided that a government initiated parliamentary question. And it was important to note that they had not been taken off special measures, but Hamza Yousaf at that time, as the health minister, had de-escalated it to a level 2, which meant they no longer needed an oversight board. Now,
Mm-hmm.
from her memory, she said that the oversight board's final meeting, as far as she can remember, was 2021. So they seem to take it out of special measures, and yet I never read that in the media. Perhaps someone did, and I'm not speaking that every newspaper did not print that. However, I would have thought that that would have been very much talked about, given the fact that the Queen Elizabeth inquiry continues to this day. And at that point in 2022, we were still reasonably in COVID kind of mode.
Yeah.
So, how anyone thought that that was a decent decision to make in lieu of everything that's been said. And now you've got even this is the health board that are now spying
Oh,
on,
indeed. Yes.
bereaved relatives, such as Louise Florence, who
Yeah.
lost her husband.
Andrew was a husband. He died, didn't he?
He died in 2020.
Yeah. And then they spied on her. Thousands of pounds, wasn't it, on private investigators and listening in on phone calls and things. They listened in on your phone call, didn't they?
Yes, yes. Basically, what had happened there was we had just come into COVID. So I can remember the day quite well. It was 9th of April 2020. I was on the ward. I was working that day as a nurse. However, you still carry the role of rep even when you're working as a nurse. So I don't mean you carry it, but how am I putting this well? I'm not putting that well. Basically, although you are the nurse, although you are working as the nurse, if you see anything that's not quite right, as the rep, you would pick up on that and you
Mm.
would say, okay, can we address that when I then become the rep? But if it's something that was seriously health and safety, I would say, okay, we need to address that now, and I would turn into the rep, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah, yeah.
So I was working as a nurse. It was the 9th of April. I had been addressing a number of things throughout COVID. At this point, I was not in full trajectory about the masks at this point. What was concerning me was, wait a minute, they're continually sending us all these code, I can't remember, it's core briefs it was called. They're sending all these core briefs to say that we must, as nurses, keep COVID out of our own homes. And yet we're taking uniforms home to wash. So I couldn't understand this. And I noted straight away that a scientist called a Dr. Katie Laird was basically saying that this is bringing COVID into your homes. You shouldn't be doing this during COVID. And she was outlining the scientific guidance for why you should be doing this. So I was saying,
well, it's a vector, isn't it? The uniform is another vector for transmission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we were wearing PPE that wasn't safe. It was an apron. It was the same white apron that resembled a very, very cheap balloon, you know, and it wasn't in any way appropriate to cover the uniform. So, and if a patient is coughing profusely into the room, that whole room is basically being eaten up almost by
because it's aerosolizing the infection, isn't it?
So therefore the uniform is very much your first line of protection to protect the skin. So I was saying, why are we taking these home? We shouldn't be doing this. This isn't right. I then received a call on the 9th of April, and it was a professional nurse advisor who advised me that they were not happy with how I was acting, and I would be taking down the nursing misconduct. It's actually quite hard to even talk about it. It was so bad. The bullying on that telephone call was probably the worst I have ever experienced in my life. And he said that they would be taking me down the line of professional nursing misconduct issues if I did not adhere to mandatory policy. And again, what you're talking about here is mandatory policy and everything else being superseded by the Health and Safety at Work Act. So the Health and Safety at Work Act should have come into force here and said, wait a minute, there's scientific evidence that you shouldn't be doing this. But at that point, there was also this Scottish government guidance. Now, at this point, and at this point only, did I think that the Scottish government guidance was correct. Because they were saying that if there was on-site laundry facilities, we should be using them. And yet there was laundry facilities in every one of the sites in Inverclyde Royal, the Lang Hill, the Larkfield unit, and Orchard View. And yet they were absolutely adamant that we were not going to be using those laundries. So I was not willing to lie down to this level of bullying. And he then wanted to meet with me face to face when government guidance again was saying that no one was supposed to be meeting face to face at this point. So I said to him, no, I'm not meeting with you. And I hung up. So in a few minutes, he called back again. Bullying, the targeting, the intimidation was even worse at this point. He told me that I would need a union rep because at this point he was absolutely adamant that we were going down the nursing misconduct line, and I thought that that was absolutely abhorrent. So basically he wanted to put 4 people in a room when the COVID guidelines were saying that, again, Scottish Government guidance, not the law, that there was to be no face-to-face meetings. And yet, here's me, the accredited health and safety rep with legal standing, covered under the Employment Rights Act 1996, my clinical role and potential registration could be at risk because I am speaking out about serious health and safety concerns. So I came off the phone to this gentleman and I phoned the regional officer who basically cancelled all the meetings. And basically at that point it was, this won't happen again. That wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. So at this point, I raised something called subject access requests. And I don't know if many people know what that is, but under the
I certainly don't know.
Under the Data Protection Act 2018, you have two different ways of getting information. You have freedom of information, which is anything that's put on regarding public information. However, subject access requests is any information that is regarding yourself. So if you've had a meeting with a manager from Scottish Government or any public service, you can ask for a copy of that through subject access requests.
Right.
So what I did at this point was, first and foremost, I went to NHS GGC and applied for subject access requests. Now, when I got them, they then have almost a month, but they'll usually breach their timeframes under the Act and nothing ever happens to them, of course. I then got the subject access request and I knew that they had been massively over redacted. So I then applied to Inverclyde Council, who I presume as part of NHS, all HSCPs are linked as partnership agencies to the original health board. So I guessed that HSCP was going to be involved in this, and they forgot to redact. So it was extremely good because it basically opened up the whole thing. And at this point, I also noticed that someone from Renfrewshire Council was also involved in the email link of 13 senior managers talking about nursing misconduct issues, talking about why was I drumming up support for grievances, talking about a cocktail of things. Now, I had, at the beginning of this, I had also said to them that my partner, who occasionally lives with me, had a severe medical condition. And there was even a subject access on that, saying that they could not take a soft approach with him. And yet he doesn't even work for any of these agencies. So that shows you the level of bullying that was involved in this. So I then decided to apply to Renfrewshire Council. They redacted differently. So at this point, I had about 500 pieces of paper. So I sat with a magnifying glass and looked to see who everybody was speaking to. And I've kind of figured it out. And I reported them to the ICO, who is the Information Commissioner's Office.
Yeah.
Now, what you've got to remember is if you are going through subject access request, it's the Information Commissioner's Office. If you're reporting anything which is freedom of information, it's public knowledge, which is a Scottish-run overseeing board. So it's two different boards. One's English, one's Scottish. So the ICO firstly came back saying that they had over-redacted information, they had over-redacted a GDPR breach, and they had not given me information that I was legally entitled to.
So that's an offence?
Yes. But nothing happened to them, of course.
Of course not, no.
Of course not, not a thing.
They're above the law, aren't they, Leslie? They're above the law.
They're omnipotent. They think they're totally above the law. However, at this point, by lifting some more redactions, because they had to, I noted that the second phone call was being listened into by a manager with a plan in place to deal with things. So they were listening in to what was being said on that call to then have a plan in place to deal with things. So that's a plan in place to deal with me. So at that point, I raised...
Were you made aware that someone was listening in?
No.
So that is also an offence then?
Yes.
Yes.
The ICO then deemed them unable to prove that they acted fairly, transparently, and within the law. So that's what the ICO come back with. So on the back of the ICO outcomes, I then raised grievances internally. And of course, nothing was upheld. nothing at all. So I had all these people on an email chain, and basically it was very, very senior people. Even the CEO of Inverclyde Council was on this email chain, and of course, no one did anything wrong. And the only outcome that came from Anne McPherson, the Director of Human Resource within GGC, was that she was going to write to the person who wanted to have who had who wanted to have meetings with me face to face, because she deemed herself to be the social distancing champion. However, she was supposed to have written to him. However, nothing else happened. No one was to blame. I was just to move on. Didn't matter if they couldn't prove that they acted within the law. I then decided, basically, to report the nurses who were involved and the social workers who were involved to their governing bodies. Now, I reported, and this was not really to get the nurses into trouble. This was trying to open up Pandora's box to try and get someone held to account. However,
to get some kind of acknowledgement.
Some kind of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
However, by doing that, the NMC, who is the Nursing and Midwifery Council, who are there to oversee how nurses behave, you have a code of conduct that you must adhere to. I then painstakingly went through all the code of conduct and noted what I felt this nurse who had bullied, intimidated, wanted to meet with me, was questioning my professionalism, as well as questioning my right to be a rep within that organisation. And I found out that the letter that Anne McPherson herself had written to him was not critical of his actions. So for someone who was in such a senior role and deemed herself the board's the social distancing champion, was not critical of this nursing professional advisor. So because of that, the NMC, as the governing body, would not take action against them because the health board deemed them to be professional. So it then showed me that all these organisations will simply agree with the public sector.
It's a conspiracy, isn't it?
Pretty much.
Pretty much a conspiracy. Nobody's looking at the truth. They're looking at what they want the truth to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
And covering up for one another.
And covering up, yeah. Cover each other. If we all, if we don't hang together, we'll all hang apart. Yeah.
Yes. It's the usual language. We're not here to talk about this. We're not here to discuss this. And they close the person down. And they do it in, I basically said it was collaborated bullying. I put it down to, and all these collective voices together to basically overshadow that one person who's basically crying out for patient safety concerns or staff's mental welfare. Nothing mattered to them bar silencing me. So I found the same when I approached the Scottish Social Services, because the council was involved. I was calling out a number of social workers as being unfit to basically practice. And I used the Nolan principles. There's 7 Nolan principles that you can use to basically showcase that someone is not worthy and fit to practice. But of course, they didn't deem anyone had done anything wrong either. So nowhere I had gone had really supported me other than the ICO. So at this point, I decided to take it down the legal route, and I raised an action against them, and they came back with a figure. Now, it wasn't about money. It's never been about money. It's always been about the greater good. And having this in the public arena, so that everybody can see what kind of environment you're working in and highlight it. Because I think in Scotland, even with Louise Lawrence, who has been an absolute advocate for health and safety, for patients' welfare, as has John Cudahy, whose daughter Molly was involved in the QE scandal. You know, they are advocates for the greater good. Now, what you find is Louise then goes on to find that she's been spied on.
Mm-hmm.
John Cudahy, Sandra Bustillo, I believe it was, said to her staff that John Cudahy, who almost lost his daughter, his 15-year-old daughter, that it was, he might have won the war. No, he might have won the battle, but he wouldn't win the war.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Now, that sounds like a threat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It does. And that's the way. So all of this with Louise and the spying on her, and now believe they're spying in MSPs as well, all of this has been done by a health board who acted the way they did with me. So I then took it down the legal route, and they agreed. They basically put a sum of money to me, and I turned it down. But I took the second amount of money basically to get it out there, because it wasn't about money, and I'm looking at donating that money away. It's not about the money here, and I don't want you to think
no, it's principle. But the money was the gateway to them acknowledging that something was there, that there was a cause. Yeah,
it was the only way to do it. So the court date had been set for, I think it was something like December. I was going ahead with that. Everything was in place, and they then came back with an offer. I rejected it. They came back with a second offer, and I took it, and that then allowed me to go public with it. However, it was really quite comical, because in the article that the Daily Record done, they said at the bottom of it that they still didn't believe that they had done anything wrong. So if they've not done anything wrong, why have they paid me out this money then?
Yeah. Basically, that was shut your face money, wasn't it? Here, have some money, go away. We don't ever want to deal with this again. Go away, go. Yeah, that's basically what that was.
Yes, basically it was, yes. However,
you haven't got away.
No, they haven't got away. At this time, with everything else that was going around, with people trying to whistleblow, COVID on the go, which I'll go into at a later stage with you, and obviously Louise Lawrence. I mean, my heart bleeds for Louise Lawrence. You're talking about a woman here who's lost her husband.
I know. You can't imagine. You lose your husband and that, and it's your life's turned upside down anyway. You've lost the person you love, and then you find out that the very hospital that was looking after him is doing this to you.
Yes.
It's horrifying. It's like a Kafkaesque nightmare. Yeah. It's Stalinist, really, isn't it?
Well, it's a lack of moral compass and the
absolutely
emotional intelligence. I will give you that, but I was well aware of that, having worked for them. So that's nothing of this. Nothing they do surprises me anymore. Nothing they do.
After doing these videos, and I do videos about all sorts of subjects, of course, and some of them I do the video. I get very angry when I'm doing the videos, especially anything to do with children. I don't like it.
Yes,
and I try, and I have a moral compass. I have an idea of what is right and what is wrong. And there's little wrongs, and then there's big wrongs. Little wrongs you can live with. Big wrongs are just no, and they need to be rejected. And I do get angry about them. And when I was doing the video about Louise Lawrence, the very first video I did about her, when I first heard about the spying thing, and that was one of those where I sat and I got angry about it, because this is a bloody hospital. They're not the CIA. They're not MI6. Get on and do your damn job of caring for people, and you don't need to be investigating whoever comes through that door. Whoever comes through that door, doesn't matter. They're a patient. Deal with it, and that's it. It's the sheer hubris of these people that they think that they're so much more important, and they're not. They're really not, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when you are a patient in hospital, you are vulnerable. You are not
Yes.
in hospital for nothing. You're in hospital
No.
because that's where you medically or emotionally, depending on where you are in that hospital, that's where you require to be. And
Oh
as a
yeah. Yeah.
patient, you are at your most vulnerable, and you are, and you would like to think that that legal duty of care is working. All that
Yeah.
risk assessment, everything. And you will see, my mum died during COVID too, and I would like to go into that. That is quite a story to tell.
You you are you are at your welcome. We will do obviously be doing this as a series of videos,
Yep.
and we can do every subject you wish to do. There is nothing off the table.
Thank you.
If so when we're doing these, this is your show. I'm only hosting it. It's your show. You know.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you are at your most vulnerable when you're a patient, and so is your relatives, because
Yeah.
especially during
Yes.
COVID, you were not getting in to see people, you were not seeing what was going on. And you ran the video the other day regarding mass DNA CPR. And let me assure you that it was very real. Why was doctors coming onto a ward and deeming everyone within a protected bracket to be DNA CPR? Why were we getting told not to tell the relatives? Why was all that going on? But why was that not illegal
Mm.
under Article 2 of the Human Rights Act,
Yes.
which states that no one has got the right to remove your life, and under the protected characteristics under the Equality Act, as someone who is vulnerable, because
Yes.
obviously I was the equality and diversity rep as well. So I was very angry about this, and I could not understand why anybody was deeming this to be within the law. I just could not understand that.
No,
And
I
yet,
mean, you said it was a blanket. It was like someone coming in and going, right. And it's all, it's when you said what you said, my first thought was it was almost the trains pulling up at Auschwitz, and you'd have a guard saying, right, this lot in the ovens. Because the doctor was walking into a ward and going, right, him, don't resuscitate. Rather than any individual care, it was almost just, yeah.
I will give you an instance of what happened to my mum. And when I was raising this through the internal processes, I was using my mother as an example almost. Mum went into hospital on the 20th of May 2020 for something that could have been dealt with at home had GPs not been
Overwhelmed.
overwhelmed or
Yeah.
maybe overprotected or whatever, right? I was not in that profession, so I'm not going to sit here and judge. However, Mum was taken in. On the day she was taken in, she was deemed DNA CPR without any discussion with family or anyone. We did not know. We did not know. My mum came back out of hospital on the 5th of June in what was, which I'll go into a further on a further recording.
Yeah.
She came out on an unsafe discharge plan, and she is basically went back in almost 36 hours later. Now, while I was going through her bag, to basically her discharge bag, to repack it to go back in, I actually found the DNA CPR form at that point in an alginate bag.
Mhm.
And we didn't know. They thought it was
Yeah.
okay to do it. Then they put it in an alginate bag and discharged it on my mum's person. She went back into hospital after a long wait because we had no out of hours GP. That's another story. However, I dropped her off at the hospital at 2:30. They let me get in the ambulance because she wasn't breathing properly. She was very distressed. I dropped her off. I walked home to try and calm my own self down.
Yeah.
Because Mum was back in hospital, and they phoned me at 23 minutes past 4. She'd only been in maybe an hour and a half, to say that they wanted to put her on a DNA CPR again. Now, at least this time they asked this
They
time.
asked, they've talked to you, yeah.
However, it showed me that was the first thing in their minds. Doesn't matter about assessing her, doesn't matter about
No.
anything, doesn't matter when they phone me during the night. just as long as that form was put in place.
So it wasn't put in for a clinical reason. It was put in by default. It was a default position. Put them on.
I believe it was. And I know that my mother had some health conditions, and the potential was that she might not have been able to bring her back if she had been in the position where she had had a cardiac arrest. And I understand that. However, I also understand Article 2 of the Human Rights Act
Indeed, the
states
right to
all
life.
governments cannot remove someone's life.
No.
And that was always my argument through this as the equalities rep.
Yeah.
So I found it even more concerning that they hung up the phone to me and then phoned my sibling and asked him the same question just a couple of hours later.
Wow.
So,
because
yeah,
they didn't get what they wanted from you, they went elsewhere.
they went to him. So that was showing me exactly what was going on at that point. And I was also getting calls from care homes who knew I was the equalities rep and saying to me, just can we pick your head? You know, can we pick your brain about things that were going on in care homes?
Mm-hmm.
And one nurse was in a dreadful state, and she said to me, the DNACPR forms came in already completed from the GP practice. So they sent them to the care home already completed.
Sorry, to get this straight, the doctor has sat in his practice with a pile of forms and a list of patients, and he's gone, right, fill this form in, fill this form in, without looking at the patients, without assessing the patients, anything. No,
Yes.
no clinical decision. It was
Well,
it was an administrative decision.
Yes, that's what she put to me. I asked her to put that in writing. She has since put that in writing, and I have turned it over to Police Scotland without her details on it because she is frightened to speak out.
Yeah.
But I have given the details because the practice had written a letter with it. I have passed on the practice's letter, and I have passed on the details of which care home this happened on. This happened within.
I guarantee it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't the only care home.
I
You can
would
guarantee this will be all over. Yeah.
Well, that's why you were then getting, at that point, you were getting nurses' forums who were getting very angry about unsafe, unlawful masks, goggles that literally had one leg on them sometimes that were said to be, they were removed because they could have damaged our eyes. The DNACPR specific medications that were getting used that basically were end of life.
I did the video on that. I think you saw where they were taking what is effectively like end of life euthanasia medication, easing the passing, as it were, and they put that in the manual as a cure for COVID. It was a cure for the SNP. It didn't do much good for the patients, did it? It was effectively euthanizing. They were effectively euthanizing. I was going to say elderly people, but just going back one step about the DNR stuff. I did also the report. There was a 44-year-old woman who was a professional sportswoman who went in and got a DNR. She's 44. She's fit, and they put a DNR on her. And then they have this end of life care being put in as a treatment for COVID. And I pointed out that was the means, and the motive, of course, was to clear the beds.
I never witnessed any of these medications being used on my patients. I never. However, I was getting calls from very distressed nurses about these medications being used. What could we do about it? And it seemed to be at that point, no matter what anyone was saying, the trajectory was simply carrying on. And no one could, exactly what you're saying about trains, only in a different way. It was as if we were on this train that no one could stop. And patients were getting DNACPR, don't tell the relatives. If you tell the relatives, there'll be consequences. And I have raised all of this with my employer. I have raised all of this with the Scottish Government, that should not have been done. And that
No.
I've been continually, I started last year basically telling Nicola Sturgeon that she had no option but to resign, because I do not believe that she worked in line with the law in regards to any of this. And then you've got the putting patients into care homes, and obviously, again, why would they not been tested?
Yeah,
And
these are untested, so they didn't know, and I suspect rather hope that they did have COVID. They didn't know if they had COVID or not, and then if we put them into the care homes, it's going to help with the figures, isn't it?
well, some were getting discharged positive for COVID-19, and I was getting calls from members and saying, we are discharging patients who've got COVID-19. Why are we doing this? And it seemed to be, no matter what anybody tried to do, at that point, they seemed to have a plan in their head. But now we know, after listening to the UK inquiry,
No
there
plan.
was no plan in their head
No,
anyway. So it was
it was
lot.
headless. It was just headless chickens. They had no idea.
Well, I remember at the start of the pandemic, I said to one of the doctors on the ward, I was arguing about the masks, about staff testing, about aerosol generated procedures, which we can get into, because I was the only rep in GGC that raised 22 grievances. So I raised them for good reason. And I said to a doctor on the ward at the start, why are we using masks that are unlawful and unsafe? And she told me that not enough nurses were dead yet.
I'm sorry, I need you to just say that one more time. This doctor said that you are not they're not going to change the masks. They're not going to refuse this. And say why again?
She said to me, it's very, very difficult. She said to me that there was not enough nurses dead yet.
That's stunning.
That was a lottery to see where any nurses came through this.
So in order to, so what the official position then was, is that you will only be issued with correct PPE, legal PPE, if enough nurses had died.
I would see it as I was arguing for FFP3 masks, because my argument was, well, it wasn't my argument. That is not true. This was brought to me by one of the board's medical emergency lecturers, trainers, whatever you want to call his role. And he was one of my members at the start, and he said to me, there's something really wrong here, Leslie. These masks don't protect us. These masks are not deemed to be lawful. So it was never me who brought this problem. It was him that brought it to me, and I took it forward. I progressed it.
Right.
The rep.
Yeah.
So
okay.
His name's Stephen McLaughlin. And he said to me, look, these masks don't protect us. So I will further go down the line in how I took this forward at a later stage. And I think you will be very shocked at how I was treated within my own union as well. However, I took this to the doctor and I said, look, we are wearing masks that don't protect us. And every time I was asking about what is a cough, they were regurgitating the same language. A cough is not an aerosol generated procedure. Yes, I know it's not a procedure. However, what does a cough produce? A cough is not an aerosol generated procedure. And if you listen back to Nicola Sturgeon and Jean Freeman at the start, standing on that podium, if anybody asked them what a cough was, that was the language they used. So I don't know if there was some agreement that they would all stick to this specific language.
Yes, this is the language we use. This is it. This is all you say. This is the official line.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yet we now know that coughing, speaking, singing,
All of it.
as Christine Peters says, a consultant within GGC, had actually more chance of creating an aerosol than an aerosol generated procedure had. So that's why I was saying, why are we using unsafe, unlawful masks? Why is this? And I will go into that. That was one of my first grievances.
Yeah.
And I was saying, you are creating death traps. You are willfully disregarding the Health and Safety at Work Act on Scottish Government guidance that these masks are safe. And yet you would go onto the Health and Safety at Work, the Health and Safety Executive site, and in 2009, there was a report on that site, clearly stating that surgical type 2 and surgical type 2R masks did not protect the wearer against coronaviruses, and yet the Scottish Government were continuing to promote masks that created a death trap and willfully disregarded the law.
I tell you, it doesn't surprise me that they're doing this. Leslie, we're coming up again on the limiting of the time here. Do you want to call it on this one, and then we'll go forward on the next one and have a look at sort of what happened at the next stage in the next video?
That's fine.
You're happy with that?
Yep, absolutely.
Because I know that you have a problem with the breathing, and I don't want to strain it too much in one go. So
yep.
Okay, well, we'll draw this to a close here then. I'll do a tail off on the back end of this one. I'll do the edit, and then we'll go forward from there, and we'll see you in the next interview, the next meeting.
Can I just add something before we finish?
Sure, please. Yes, yes.
At this time, I was also noticing when I was looking at the nurses' forums that the anger was really beginning to boil within nurses about their own situations, their family situations, their patient situations, the relatives of their family, and that's when I noticed that they began calling Jean Freeman and Nicola Sturgeon the Shipman sisters.
And we all call them that now.
That was me that came out with that publicly from day one, because it was on a nurse's.
Oh, you're the one that's put that out there into the public domain.
I'm afraid I did, yes.
For that, we will be forever thankful.
Thank you.
Anyway, thanks very much. We'll round this off here. We'll sort out the next one. I'll be in touch with you. We'll probably do a call first, and then I'll be in touch so we know we're going to do the shape of the next interview, and I'll round that off. So for now, Leslie, thank you very much for this. This has been fantastic, and I hope that the viewers watching this will start to see the awfulness of what is truly going on. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, till the next time. Bye. So that sort of rounds off the first of the series of interviews we're going to do. As you see, this one was more about the culture of the NHS sort of prior to COVID and then during the early days of COVID. And there's, I think, some revelations in that one that will kind of shock a lot of people to think that it was this bad. And that they were deliberately hiding stuff from families which have covered. The mass euthanizing of patients which have covered, but there was little things like the fact that it was Leslie who sort of highlighted the fact that nurses were calling these two the Shipman sisters. So well done to her. I did like the fact that that's come out, but I mean generally there's a lot there that's going on. She's flagging up a lot more stuff to come, and we will be going more into some specifics about the COVID stuff, about what the government was saying. About the state of, how they knew the hospitals were failing, how they knew the doctors didn't have enough equipment, but the fact that legally the PPE equipment that was handed out to nurses, which the nurses knew wasn't legally PPE equipment, and yet were still expected to use it as if it was PPE, in order to push this agenda of everyone's got to wear masks and all that. And it's all utter rubbish. And it does go to show that we have an awful lot wrong with our health service generally, but specifically in Scotland, they were ignoring the law and pushing an agenda created by Sturgeon, by Jean Freeman, and by others around them. That elite created these rules, and they basically said you obey the rules and you ignore the law. And if they were breaking the law, which I believe they were, and I think we've seen evidence that they were, then they need to be prosecuted. But there'll be more to come. We're going to thank, I don't want to get this one too long, we're going to thank Leslie there. We're going to look forward to the next one, and I'll speak to her in the next few days, and we'll get another one up shortly, and we'll concentrate on some of the more sort of pertinent issues. But this gives you a very good basis to see the kind of atmosphere that all of this was going on, even before COVID hit. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been entertaining, and I hope it has earned a subscription. And if you are interested, please do subscribe, because there is going to be a lot more to come and a lot more revelations. I happen to know, because I happen to know some of the things that she's going to be discussing in future. But we laid this one out as the bedding down, and we're going to, plant the various seeds in it going forward. So I'll round off there. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, stay safe, stay well. Don't forget, I'll be doing other videos on other subjects in between, but we will definitely be returning to this. Thanks. Bye.